This is Jerry Barrett talking. Today's date is March 19th, 1986. I'm interviewing Rolf, I'll spell that R-O-L-F, Andresen, A-N-D-R-E-S-E-N, in his office at Eastern Airlines headquarters in Miami. Rolf, I wonder if you would begin by just talking a little bit about how you happened to be here. What did you do before you came to Eastern briefly, and what have you been doing since you got here?
Yeah, I joined Eastern Airlines in 1968, and before that I had always worked in the financial areas for large corporations, which included the Ford Motor Company, Sperry Rand, and the Getty Oil Company. And in joining Eastern Airlines, I started in charge of the budget function in the marketing group, and then moved on to becoming assistant treasurer, and I've been a treasurer since 1981.
Okay. I take it that your involvement in the broad area of labor relations is a more recent thing. Just in the last few years, or were you involved in it earlier than that?
I think the direct participation with labor groups began really in late 1982 and early 1983, and I guess it started in connection with the interrelationship between labor issues and the financial condition of the company, and as the two became more intertwined, there was a need to make the parties work together. And I believe that Borman's style of management, right from the beginning, it had always been one of an open door policy, that people should have access to the facts and understand what was developing. So as deregulation started taking effect in the early 80s, especially starting in 1981, new airlines coming up, there was a need to have more involvement on the financial side. My recollection would be going back to 1983, and a lot of the current cycle we've had in some way is related back to March 1983, when we had a famous threat of a strike by the IM, and during which case the company ended up signing a contract that was considered by Borman and most of management as too expensive for the company. That led to a more direct involvement, my recollection, as to explaining financial issues and whatnot. And I think Borman has stated this very clearly, that the final position of the company was influenced very highly by the fact that we looked at our cash, and still remember Borman calling me up to his office and asking the question, what is exactly our cash position over the next month or two if we have a strike? And that was before his going to Washington, and so there was a great input there on the financial side, and that the cash was not strong enough to take more aggressive steps at that point in time. So that led to a situation of education as to what is the financial condition of the company. I still remember a Saturday in that March of 1983, before one of the strike deadlines. There had been two, in which Charlie Bryan, on an interview on the radio, stated to the public that in his opinion, and in the opinion of consultants he had hired, that the financial condition of the company was sound, and it permitted entering into the kinds of labor agreements that he was proposing to the company, which it really left me confused as to what the meaning of that was, knowing what numbers we had been looking at. this leads right into the educational process that we embarked upon that time under the leadership of Borman. And the evolution of that education process, I think, goes from a point in which we were dealing with a total traditional conventional approach of labor to a company, to a process that became much more sophisticated and I believe cooperative. Because if you go to the beginning, you find that in the statements about management is a company, they keep different sets of books. They find numerous ways of hiding cash, and some of these things were even published in the newspapers. The contentions made was along the lines that number one, we charge depreciation to hide cash, and that we created what is called an unearned transportation revenue account, and that's another way of storing away cash that doesn't show up. And as far as those elements are concerned, it didn't take long, I think, for all the parties involved to clear the air quickly as to what the accounting rules are. And all this started at the time that Bill Ussery joined, and then the Lazards were brought in to review the financial condition of the company. And to some extent, that portion was a real success because it brought in people, professional people from the outside who worked hand in hand with the labor representatives, and we spent long days and into the nights answering all these questions and opening up all what was so-called opening up the books in a general way. And from our standpoint, it was quite pleasing that there was no criticism in any way as to how we managed. I'm talking the financial function, and particularly the functions of the treasury of the company, where we invest cash, we project our cash, which has a lot of impact on looking at the future and predicting where we would have a problem, and so forth. And out of all that process, there was no particular issue that was raised of any, if not wrongdoing, any technical deficiency in the way in which we were doing those items. So I think that brought the level of dealing from a point of view of a financial function of labor organizations to a level of more confidence and trust. And in spite of what may have happened later on, I think that the underlying background of numbers was one that didn't have that much disagreement on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think where later on disagreements may have surfaced were on the meaning of what were the answers or what were the issues in general for the future. And so that's basically what the evolution, I think, in the exchanging of financial information.
I imagine just from your point of view, on a personal basis, there was some satisfaction in having these outsiders take a look at what your immediate stewardship and said it was okay.
Well, we took a lot of time to be responsive to the concerns, and that involved meeting with representatives of different groups. I remember over this last years having meetings, Wayne Yeoman and myself, with the committees of the TWU, of the IM, and extensive meetings with pilots and with their MEC, in reviewing areas where slogans had developed out there, and some slogans would start along the lines, if we didn't buy all those airplanes, we just wouldn't have the problems we have. So we are unable to pay the salaries demanded by some of the labor groups because we were embarked on those capital expenditures. And I believe a lot of unfair representations were made by the press also with respect to Eastern and with respect to our chairman, and so we were pretty hard to try to clarify them. And let me be more specific. For instance, even people out there that are called security analysts were loosely embarked on making statements on the 757 that since the fuel prices weren't continuing to escalate in a very uncontrolled manner, that the economics of the 757 were no longer attractive. And that was totally wrong from two points of view, really. On the one hand is that the economics of the 757, when the orders were placed and the decisions were made, was before the second surge in fuel prices. So the projection for fuel prices were not that you had to pay $2 for the plane to make sense, not at all. It was before the 1979 surge in fuel prices. And then on the other hand, they were stating, well, it doesn't make sense to buy $40 million airplanes given the fuel prices, and that doesn't recognize the fact that we weren't buying planes for $40 million at all. We had attractive prices from the manufacturers, from Boeing, and in terms of being the launching customer, from Rolls-Royce, and in terms of having being the company that really made the 535 engine possible. We had very attractive terms, attractive financing, and then more important than that, the company, Eastern Airlines probably, and Borman specifically, was instrumental in getting an extension of safe harbor leasing into 1983, which was crucial to our 757 program. And so we ended up getting for the first 15 airplanes an average price of $24.5 million rather than 33 or 35 million that people were contending. So we spent a lot of time explaining our aircraft program and showing that, in effect, this was very helpful for the company in many ways. And so we explained to the people that when we bought airplanes, we were not only following the traditional rules that you have to have a return on investment and you have to have markets to use those planes, but in addition we had a criteria over and above that. Number one, that we would not finance it internally at all. We would do 100% financing outside, which from a long-term standpoint, probably you should be more conservative, but under the circumstances we would do it. And the fact that the cash generated from the planes on an incremental basis had to be more than sufficient to service the debt. So we were proving to these people that the aircraft transactions themselves were cash positive and were not draining anything. As a matter of fact, I think you can take an example of some of the financing on 757s. We actually used the attributes of a new airplane to generate more than 100% financing instead of having to borrow at higher rates somewhere else. So we were maximizing the potential. Let me be specific. We could do a leveraged lease financing at 6% for the whole airplane. In addition, we were taking some export credit from the British and some financing from the airframe manufacturer. So we were bringing in cash rather than draining cash. But that had the question of airplanes had become quite an emotional issue, I think, especially with the pilots. And we struggled quite a while with those principles. A lot of the issues that then became more involved with understanding the process of deregulation. I think that one could go through the different steps, and the 1983 issue after the settlement in March led us to identify a cash crisis. Specifically, we knew the day, June 30th, 1983, because it's a day in which we have disbursements of almost $100 million in one day. And so we identified that day and worked to establish a program. And in the initial phases of this, of the identifying the need for adjustments, we had a very broad approach to the answer. That is, we say, well, there's a problem, labor will step in, lenders will step in, manufacturers will contribute, and it was a very, very neat way of doing it because it was very complicated. And so back in '83, everybody recognized we have to step into this. Labor did something. We got the banks to open up a letter of credit and put $50 million more. Then we got and went over to the Europeans and they said, you're part of the Eastern future. You should defer debt for $50 million. We went to the insurance companies. Then we went and talked to Boeing and Rolls-Royce. They deferred advance payments. And it was a very difficult program to put together, but a total success in terms of cooperation of all the parties. And they all felt they had done their share, which got to be pretty difficult because a lot of people say, yes, I'm willing to do something, but what is my fair share of the big picture? And but as you go through the evolution of the need to have a program in 1984, then a need in 1985, or 1985 I look at as the undoing of a lot of the progress we had made before for whatever reasons. You find that as you look at the position of the lenders, they started to harden their position as to the role that labor was playing in this here. So while in 1983 they say, fine, you know, we're going to do something here also to help go through this. As we got into the 1984 problem, now they felt that the world was changing and that what they had looked at in 1983 as an interim problem was starting to be more something that they would say, hey, this is a permanent thing that you have to address. So they were showing less willingness, let alone to put money into the process. They were showing less willingness to even provide some of the covenant levels unless we could show that we would have a certain level of profitability. And probably the culmination of this hardening process of lenders is what we're going right now in the final stages of it at the beginning of 1986, where they felt that from their standpoint the economics of the airline industry were very, very clear that you had to adjust your cost structure, and while we talk about our high non-operating expenses, that the magnitude of the problem is really in one of the components of operating expenses, and therefore there should be a permanent adjustment. And looking back, I think that there were a lot of successes, tremendous, I think, in very difficult situations in which a lot of efforts went into it from everyone, from Borman down and down through the senior management. I believe that Ussery always played a tremendous role of a catalyst with his unending source of energy and patience, and really I think some of those problems probably couldn't have been brought together without the ability to take two totally different positions and find a way of blending them. And I think the example of that is in the crisis that came up early 1985 again. You know, we had gone through 83, 84, so we get into 85. IEM wants snapback, and everybody wants snapback, and I still remember in January a meeting on a Sunday evening, and there seemed to be no answer to how the parties could be reconciled given the position they had taken, and out of that came what was called the Ussery plan, which brought everybody back together, and that was already in the early month of February 1985. And but in looking back, and it's still too close to call it history, I think that it was very difficult to be able to get an understanding of the permanency of what was happening. And in the absence of being able to sell that one, you end up with a 1 year or 2 year program.
Mm-hmm.
That while they were huge triumphs for, I think, in many ways, management and labor, in the final analysis, they would snap back and you were back to zero. And that was, I think, the unfortunate thing, that there was no way of finding a permanent answer. I think maybe institutionally some of the people in the process didn't have the doubts that normally you would find, that, well, what about the numbers of the company? I think everybody was understanding the numbers of the company, but in some way you hoped that the answer would come from somewhere else, whether from heaven or from some Arab source who will pump in $2 billion and defer the problem for another 10 years. But there was just no way of whether it's because of the expectations of people, the difficulty to adjust, or the suspicions that somebody else is getting a better deal, that it could become a permanent answer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it just couldn't be repeated. The other element of criticism that during the period kept coming up relates to the fact, well, if it's not the purchase of airplanes, maybe the problem of the company is that you just have too heavy a debt burden, and nobody's trying to deny that. And we're spending less than 5 cents right now per dollar of revenue in meeting our non-op. It's a little bit over the average for the industry, but by itself it's not the ultimate cure for our earnings situation, because even if you cut it totally in half and really bring it to you're dealing with cutting $230 million annual non-op, 210, 115, and it's not the magnitude of the numbers that we've been looking at being 400 or 500 million, let alone if you compare our P&L to Continental, and you adjust for size of the enterprise, you're talking difference of 800 million in one of the sources. And but still we spend a lot of time looking at non-op. In non-op, or the interest expense of the companies, we call it non-operating, it's something that, while purists in corporate finance will say you can only change those things for an extended period of time, 10 years, and so on. And here, if you start showing some earnings, you can work on it very quickly. And we had a very successful beginning in 1985. The first half of 1985 was a very successful 6-month period. True, we were helped a little bit we were helped significantly by 2 strikes in the industry, at first Pan Am and then United. Though the favorable trend had set in, and we were showing very good yields with our yield management, very good positive results. There was a lot of traffic. But from a financial standpoint, just with that progress that was being made, and In quarter over quarter, we started showing improvements in the third quarter of '84, further improvement in the fourth quarter, and then into 1985, we found that we could go to the stock market, sell 12,650,000 shares of common, and we had normalized our pension payments. We had prepaid amounts that we had deferred from '83, and it was really a momentum we were experiencing there. And so then we were embarking further. We were going to swap debt for equity, and it's really impressive how quickly you can start improving, curing that problem. Unfortunately, as we got into the second half of '85, you had two forces working against that progress. One was that what I call as we were experiencing the undoing of the labor agreements, and we were snapping back progressively, the labor costs going up, and then the yields in the market were just taking a downward turn, and by the end of '85 we were 10-12% less yield in the market. So those two forces ended the very short-lived experience of how you can start improving your financial structure. But still, the contention for a lot of this period was that the source of the problem is the capital structure of the company. And I guess we as humans always like to relate a problem to one single issue because it's easier to deal with it. And there are those who believe that the airplanes were the problem, there are those who believe the capital structure were the problem, and so they believe that some of us were the problem, and so forth and so on. But for those who adhere to the high debt issue, I've talked earlier about how we bought the airplanes, and yes, we incurred debt, but the internal economies of those airplanes, which some of it relates to less fuel, less maintenance costs, it's not all in and on cash-wise, they were self-sufficient. But when the decisions first were made to buy those airplanes, the Airbus and those, which I think were two tremendous successes, and I know that Borman was the inspiration behind those two programs, and he was criticized highly for those decisions. But as time went by, I think people now recognize that if it wasn't for those two decisions, probably wouldn't be here anymore. We'd be flying Electras, and you can't fly an airline with Electras now. And and even from a point of view of the quality of the airplanes, they were also a tremendous success from that standpoint and the choice. So those orders were placed in the late 70s. Those orders weren't placed in 1980, 81, 82. As a matter of fact, the position was that we couldn't go on purchasing the 757s if it wasn't for the safe harbor leasing that I've mentioned before. But when those decisions were made, you didn't need huge profits at all to have a very, very sustainable cash flow and capital structure. What happens is that you start in 1980, and then you start losing money all the way through 1984. We had a modest 6.3 profit in '85, so we don't have to have that year to that long. But in my recollection, I think the number says that we lost something like $390 million, $390 million. And if you just go and adjust our capital structure for not having lost that amount, I'm not saying making money, just not having lost that money, you have a total different picture of the capitalization of the company. So what comes first, I don't know.
Yes.
But the point is that in some way those losses during those years, because of the changing environment, and we were attacked probably by deregulation earlier than others, it took their toll in many ways. As treasurer of the company, I find it quite interesting the amount of staying power and cash generation power that a company like this has, in spite of all the troubles we've had. Though we had one of the richest and most educational capital structures that you can find probably in the world. And but it did get put together, and we did the heaviest financing of the company on A300s and 757s and 727s at a time when we were going through huge financial difficulties. And so I think overall, undoubtedly, that has helped us to maintain Eastern in the marketplace. And I think other aspect probably of the cash flow of the company, we've covered the non-op, we've covered the aircraft purchase, which have been pretty big issues. And I don't know if there are some other particular areas here you can think of, Jerry, that you think you'd like to hear about.
I might ask you about prior to deregulation, when it was just a rumor that something like that was going to happen in Washington. Were you involved in trying to anticipate the impact of that?
Yes, we were all part of that process, and at that time, Borman would ask that we, the officers of the company, visit different stations, which was a very successful program. I still remember going to visit our people in the Bahamas and in Nassau, and I met with all our employees there at the airport, and somebody came by to say hello from a competing airline, and they were sort of shocked that we were coming to taking the trouble of talking to our employees when one of their big shots happens to be in the Bahamas, and they've never seen him. But having said that, yes, we spent a lot of time, and there were a lot of efforts, as you all know. I'm sure probably people have told you that, opposing deregulation, because we understood that we had learned how to play the game with different rules.
Yes.
And when somebody says, hey, we're going to change how we play the game, it would get tough. And it was recognized in our case that, in addition, we didn't have the muscle that some of the other players may have had in the process. I think nobody knew exactly how it would happen, when it would happen, but history told you very clearly that if you open up the doors, that there were things that were bound to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And you have sort of an oligopoly at the top. Do I think in the airlines we always recognized that there could be a number of small players on the fringes on a specialized basis, because the barriers to entry are not that huge. It's not like wanting to start an automotive company.
Mm-hmm.
On the fringes, you need to invest in a few airplanes, and then you can start some sort of airline operation. But as far as on a national scale, where you need all the massive national scale, there you would see the workings of concentration that you have seen in other industries. But as usual, you hear people talking about an oncoming war and the dangers, and it's right there facing you, and nobody will leave their comfortable place in some of those European countries until it was too late.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in many ways that message did not really penetrate
Mm-hmm.
from an intellectual understanding to the need to make adjustments.
Mm-hmm.
And probably the other misunderstanding on the labor unions was that this was going to be a shock to the union movements, if anything. And I don't think that got properly recognized.
Mm-hmm.
The whole thing it was pushed as a bonanza for the consumer. But from my standpoint, I thought things would evolve quicker. It took longer before the process really set in, and I think now you have it in its full force. Because at the beginning, when an investor called you or a lender called you and asked that you tell them, you know, what was going on with prices, you could pretty well point at the map and say, here, there's something happened here, somebody's attacking here, and that was just massive, and it's just the industry, period, and where there's another way of marketing and pricing the product, and that's going to be here to stay. So we're learning to adjust. Lenders like to analyze industries. Investors, lenders, they claim to understand a lot. Maybe they do. And on the other hand, because of all the people that have come to analyze us and check on us, we're used to that. We're used to defending ourselves, explaining what we do, whether it's because of investors or auditors or laborers or guys who are supposed to write a special report on us. And in this process, they've looked at all the segments of the business and trying to find, hey, what is the cure if there's financial performance. And I believe a lot of the investors and lenders have recognized that the company itself, gives them a lot of comfort, because as we got into deregulation, I think there are airlines that what I call had an identity crisis. They'd ask, who are we? What are we going to do? And they would look at the map. Where do we go? And they were trying to restructure themselves, find themselves where to go. And I think Eastern here, you never found an identity crisis. This airline, this guy has an identity. It stayed. Why? Because it has its presence in the market. And the only thing that happened with deregulation, it took the opportunity to rationalize itself and expand from its basic system. And so we didn't have any of those problems. And so these people, as you take off the resources and the dynamics of a company, they start from roots, and okay, roots, they find that the system makes tremendous sense, and anybody I think that understands better than I do those things will tell you that they think it makes very much sense. It's a system, and so you build around it and then they make it stronger and grow on it. Then you go into the second resource, which is aircraft, and the cost of that resource, and really, from investors, in spite of comments thrown here and there by guys who have to write columns for at some point in time, they're not sure what they want to say. The fact is that the basic two aircraft decisions have been very well received, very good review, and then you can go on through the functional dynamics of the airline, and they feel that the scheduling and the airline of that basic route system has been pretty aggressive in the marketing. It has led in many areas, and it worked very well. And finally, it's gotten down to that. We just had a cost problem when you get to the essence of it, and that's why the hardening of a lot of the lenders has gotten to the point where on the last go, and they just had enough. And if it came this time, they were going to say, well, we're going to tank it. We want our planes back. And there was no doubt. They felt we've gone through these things before, and I know that these are things that you don't like to go quoting around because they get misinterpreted, but in some way, as investors and as lenders, they felt that the resources of the company would end up going back for supporting wages and salaries that they think were appropriate. and which is what a snapback had brought us back to 1/1/86. And on the other hand, as far as the response to all this crisis, I think that the company's been fortunate to have a group of people who are very quick in recognizing realities. And sometimes I would worry about, if you every situation has involved seeing something happening but looking down the road a bit, and even if you don't want to put yourself in the situation of saying if things are going well, you look down the road and they don't look that great, you start acting on the fact that things are going to turn around. You go to the situation where things are not, you see signs already taking reality, but you just like to wish them away. I really find that it's been quite a satisfaction how to see the reaction of the top guys in the company when they recognize a trend, they face the reality. Let's go and talk to the people, not put it away when it's too late. And you know very well that there are certain situations in the industry where some people let things go too far where they couldn't do anything about it. And I know people ask, what is your forecasting system? I say, well, it depends what period we're in. And sometimes we forecast things by the hour. Sometimes we forecast them by the day. Depends what the problem is. But really, as we worried about many of these problems, I found it was a tremendous, given all the pressures, it was a tremendous benefit or advantage, and for the company, to have people who, when they say, hey, it's there, there's something here, that the signs are very clear to us, let's go and act. And there was no embarrassment, there was total candidness and honesty, and I think the labor leaders probably haven't appreciated as much as they should. I know that although the process was intended to be a rational business process, and I think that all the parties were treated in that manner, and but in trying to solve the problems, there was always a special place, I think, in the mind and the heart. We could bring it into play. Borman to try to really find a place for the working people of the company, where they could have a long-term future. And he always had that, and he's always had that right in front of his consideration. And but that's almost looking at the fact that when a new test was put before the labor groups, it was just impossible politically or in the reality of the world to deal with it. And I think the board had the final word on
it. The last thing you were saying there, you're referring to the events in the first quarter of '86.
Yeah, I'm bringing this to the point where I think that to go back and say that there were no achievements would be a mistake, because by golly, I think that there was a lot of give and take, and some things came out of it. But I think there was a new test in '86, and this last test was unsuccessful, and therefore we find ourselves being part of a conglomerate, but or a holding company, and that's another topic. And I think we all probably understand that that may be better for the long run of the company and its employees and so forth.
But you're saying, though, that all the things that happened before shouldn't be looked on as failures simply because the last test was not didn't have the outcome that everybody
That's right.
desired.
But in the minds of a lot of people, and I hear this from outsiders, you know, they tend then to erase everything that happened before, and I tell them it's a mistake.
Hmm.
It's a total mistake, and it shouldn't be treated that way.
Mm-hmm. Were you at all involved in the discussions and calculations that went into the profit sharing that was developed in late '87 and no, I'm sorry, late '77? Get my time right. Late '76 and '77. The profit sharing system that was supposed to be a 5-year.
It was called the VEP.
Yes.
Yes, I was around, involved in that process. I believe that was something very, very creative, and very understandable by all the people. It had and from a financial economic standpoint, it was based on 2%. The company needing 2%, not having a goal of 2% earnings on revenues, but having the need for a minimum, which gets back to what I said about the aircraft programs. You know, I mean, our capital structure would be different without losses. And if you go to a minimum level or 2%, and you have to have faith in yourself, that's what we're looking at.
Okay, we're back on. You were just talking about the VEP.
And it had a band of it was that the employees would I think the number was 3.5%. You know, would give up to 3.5% of the wages to help sustain the 2%. On the other hand, if we went over the 2%, there would be a payback to the employees. And I think it was the first important program at that time before the deregulation issues we've been talking about. This was simply what I would go back to phase one of Borman's program to reshape the company, which undoubtedly he did, and this was the basis of creating some stability in earnings that would help us to bring in all the people from needed to renew the financing and equipment of the company, and it worked very well. There was one year where the people got back money, and there was another year where they sustained the money, but they supported the 2% level. And but then we got, we made money, and 75 was a very bad year. That's at the time that Borman came in, and he worked on turning this around, and we had some good years because we made money in 76, 77, 78, 79, and so we had 4 years. My recollection is right, of profits, and VEP was there, and I think it was a great program.
Mm-hmm.
I think at the end probably it got into the hands of political issues, and that's when it ran into trouble.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a very good program.
And you feel it was innovative as well.
Very much.
Yeah.
I think it's. I still think that a lot of the things that were done here, like that program, and that program was carried into the financing of the company, where we
Yes.
bought airplanes with the VEP version in them, and people, lenders and manufacturers were excited about it, because they were all part of a new approach to bringing stability. and it had a lot of support. It was hard to sell, I'm sure, at the beginning, but it ended up being extremely useful. Now, I think as you go into the following years, I think a lot of the programs that the companies had have been innovative, imaginative. As one of the large insurance company has told me in recent months, that they felt that the top management of the company is demonstrating a tremendous ability to find some imaginative answer to what other people consider to be situations without a solution.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's been the case. They've seen many dark days, and whether it's VEP or ownership or so many other instruments that we've created for the employees, and all that I think demonstrates that the fact that there's been a great attempt to solve the problem with the people of the company.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we'll stop at that point.
All right,
I
very
really
good.
appreciate your time.
Okay,
Thank you now.
you're welcome.